Welcome, 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 everyone. It's so wonderful to have you here. I'm Jessica Green, and together with Zina, Jacque, and Claire Nelson, we welcome you to a new season of Courageous Conversations. After a summer's pause, we're so happy to be back together again. And boy, are we looking forward to being with you here tonight. Last year, we started gathering at Barrington's White House to explore how to foster greater inclusion and belonging in our community. And thanks to your interest, we're continuing with second Wednesdays at 7 p.m. virtually until it is safe to be together. Thanks to support from our sponsors and partners, Dominic Green, Kim Duchessois, Susan and Rich Padula, Julie Knack and Mike Regali, BMO Wealth Management, Barrington Area Community Foundation, Barrington's White House, Barrington Area Library, and Be Strong Together. If you're a returning community member, thank you for continuing to travel this path together. If you're new tonight, you're right in time. As Zina says, you are welcome here and you are definitely needed here. So I just want us to take a minute to take a deep breath and exhale and get ourselves grounded and present. Before we get going, we're going to begin by showing a short video of how we gather when we're together.
We've learned how we gather really matters. And so here are some guidelines for how we gather.
Welcome to Courageous Community, where together we are building greater inclusion and belonging. We're your hosts, Zina, Jacque, and Jessica Green, coming to you from Barrington, Illinois, home of the pilot series, A Year of Courageous Conversations.
Whether you have been part of this community from inception or are just joining us, you are welcome here. In order to create a space of shared trust, we frame our gatherings within the grounding virtues of the On Being Project. Here, we strive to practice hospitality, humility, patience, generous listening, and adventurous civility, and the notion that our words matter.
Intentionally being in community with one another takes conscious effort. It is a choice and a practice. Here are some tips for engaging mindfully throughout this work. Be present. Turn off your phone and other media devices. Say no to thoughts that have nothing to do with the conversation you are having. Be other-focused. Immerse yourself in every word that is spoken. Listen to the tone of the other person's voice. Listen using your eyes. Suspend judgment. Attempt to truly understand what the other person is saying without judgment, criticism, or defensiveness. Different from a debate or competition, the goal is understanding and truth-seeking. Respond versus react. Listen, take a breath, respond. Pay attention to what feelings arise. And take breaks. This is both head and body work. If you feel tense, step out for water, fresh air, or a stretch.
We believe inner work is required for ourselves when we come into courageous conversations with others. To help create the space for both personal transformation and that of our community, we set the following intentions. When one person is talking, others should be listening. Avoid interrupting, talking over one another. Do this in order to honor and respect each voice.
What's said here stays here. What's learned here leaves with you. This should be a place where people can share personal stories and not worry about that being discussed outside of the room.
Step up, step back. If you're someone who tends to talk a lot, like me, challenge yourself to let others talk first. And if you're someone who tends to hold back, challenge yourself to contribute a little more. Be aware of how much space you're taking.
Use I statements. Everyone is entitled to their feelings, as long as they are sharing from their own personal experience. Avoid speaking on behalf of others or making broad assumptions or generalizations about groups of people.
We are all learning. We should have badges that say, we are learners. If you know a lot about a subject, try to remember that at one time you were just beginning. Be patient with people who are just beginning.
Care for each other. This is hard work, and it's easy to take our stress out on one another. Be gentle and kind with yourself and with each other.
Stay curious. The greatest threat to civility and ultimately to civilization is an excess of certitude. Get uncomfortable. Change doesn't happen when we stay comfortable, but we are designed to seek comfort. Brian Stevenson teaches, in brokenness, we understand what it means to be human. And this is my favorite. Stay hopeful. Hopelessness is the enemy of justice. Another thing Brian Stevenson teaches. He says, we each have a responsibility to protect our own hopefulness and to believe things are possible even when we haven't seen them yet. Hope is what gets in us and helps us stand up when other people tell us to sit down. The entirety of this pilot year is available to you on our website, courageousconversations.us. And whether you're new to this journey and this work or have been with us from the beginning, we encourage you, strongly encourage you, to revisit the website the whole first season, because it lays out the foundation from which we continue to build courageous community.
Thank you for walking this path with us. Okay, I know you all have those grounding virtues down already. Quick learners we've got here, but we love to let those grounding virtues hold us together in this space. So thank you for keeping them in mind as we move forward throughout this season. Now, a little bit about how tonight will work. Our topic is standing in another's shoes. And here's our premise. We hear a lot that we are divided, but might sometimes it be that we're disconnected. We share so much in common, but we also can have very different lived experiences based on our race, class, faith, ability, and more. Last spring, we learned how we've become spatially separated and the great cost separation brings to our social and economic well-being. We shared great books like The Color of Law and The Big Sort, and we watched Chimamanda Adichie's fabulous TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story, about the harms of reducing people or communities to incomplete narratives and stereotypes. We're seeing some of this in our country right now. But we want to practice curiosity. We want to get the whole story, and we want to hear many stories. So tonight, we will think about how we as individuals can stand in the gaps and liminal spaces, as Zina says, between us. How can we bear witness to stories and lived experiences different than our own? How can we build bridges across borders and separations, both visible and invisible? To help us imagine how to do this, we have three fabulous guest speakers. Todd Dethridge from Telos Group in Washington, D.C., Tonika Lewis-Johnson of Folded Map Project in Chicago, and Dr. Cynthia Armanderas Maxwell of Sunny Hill Elementary School in Carpentersville, who are each doing this storytelling and bridge building work in different and vital ways. With their help over the course of our time together, we'll start globally and then zoom in locally. Then we'll all discuss together in breakout rooms at the end. Speaking of rooms, I just want to situate us for tonight. This series was born in and continues to be rooted in the village of Barrington, Illinois, where Zina and I are sitting here outside of Chicago. Many of you either live here or are connected to this community through family, friends, or work. But we're also thrilled that being virtual means we can open that door a bit wider. So tonight and moving forward, we have more friends joining from different locations across the country. And to you, we say welcome. This is important to note because when we say our hope here is to build courageous community, the word community may mean different things to different people. And that's okay. It might mean the Barrington area or Chicagoland for some of us. It might mean your school or work or worship community. It might mean just all of us gathered right here, right now, building a courageous community together in this space. So please define community in a way that makes sense to you. About halfway through the program, we'll take a brief 5-minute intermission to stretch and refill our refreshments. And then we'll come back together for breakout dialogues led by our fantastic facilitator core of our series fellows and advisors. Stay on the line and you'll be automatically moved into a breakout room by our awesome tech producer, JP. At the very end, before 9 p.m., we will all come back together to share from our breakouts and end with a closing word from Reverend Zina. So trust us, you want to stay until the end. We are recording this presentation, not the breakout conversations, but the rest of the presentation. So please remain muted when you are listening and switch off all cell phones to be fully present. We will be publishing the video afterwards on our website. With that, it is my great pleasure to introduce my co-host and beloved pastor of the Community Church of Barrington, Reverend Dr. Zina Jacque.
Good evening, friends. You've heard the title of our talk tonight, Standing in Another's Shoes. But if the truth is told, I can never really stand in your shoes, nor you in mine. But we can get proximate. Brian Stevenson talks about getting proximate. He says you have to find ways to get closer to people who are excluded. And if you find ways to get past the barriers that exclude, you will discover something transformative. He says there is power in proximity. We can get proximate to one another as we listen to one another's stories, as we listen generously, as we ask questions, and as we believe what we hear in those stories. When you get proximate to me and tell your story, or I to you, that's when the transformation begins. So as we start this evening, I want you to think about focusing tonight on issues of race and on issues of class and on issues of faith and orientation and ability, because those are some of the things that divide us. I want you to focus on that, and I want you to think about how to understand and empathize and get proximate. Be in relationship with people who are different and have different lived experiences than you. So to start, I want you, if you have a piece of paper nearby, to jot down, which of these uncomfortable shoes have you had to wear? You've been the only person of your race or class or faith or ability or orientation in a leadership position. Ever put on that shoe? Your first name has been mispronounced in a meeting or a class or in a social gathering. You've been introduced casually in a professional setting without any of your titles or credentials. Or you've been followed or monitored closely in a store. Ever put on those shoes? Tonight, we want to ask ourselves, when you think of your life, to whom are you proximate? Who represents difference that you might learn from? With whom are you proximate and who's missing? With whom are you never proximate? And what would happen if you got proximate? And what are some of the ways you might do that? We're so glad you're here tonight. We're so glad you want to engage in being proximate and trying on those shoes. We believe this is a transformative time. With that, I will turn it back to my sister and my friend Jessica to begin our interviews.
Thank you, Zina. It is my pleasure to introduce Todd Dethridge, Executive Director and co-founder of Telos Group, based in Washington, D.C. Todd spent 16 years in senior positions in the legislative and executive branches of the U.S. government before co-founding the Telos Group. From 2005 to 2009, he was Chief of Staff in the Secretary of State's Office of Policy Planning at the U.S. State Department. He also spent 2 years as Senior Advisor in the Department's Office of International Religious Freedom, where he specialized in religious freedom in the Middle East. Todd worked for a decade in the U.S. Congress, including 6 years as Chief of Staff to Senator Tim Hutchinson. He is a native Arkansan and a graduate of the University of Arkansas. He began his career as an educator, and he and his family live in Fairfax County, Virginia. Todd, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here. Thanks, Jess. Thanks, Zina.
So happy to have you with us tonight. And I actually, I've got a kick out of you being here because you and I think, have had some courageous conversations in our travels together and over the years that we've gotten to know each other. So I'm thrilled to have you here tonight. Thank you.
An honor to be here. Thank you.
I've had the privilege of going on 2 of your learning exchanges, the first to Israel and Palestine, and the second to the American South, where I got to dive deep into African-American history. The mission of your organization, Telos Group, is to form communities of American peacemakers, equipping us to help reconcile seemingly intractable conflict at home and abroad. Both trips truly deepened my understanding of lived experiences in both places through multi-narrative storytelling. Tell us, how did you begin this work? And how did you move from the political realm into bridge building?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I think the best way to say it is I co-founded Telos because I got proximate to Israelis and Palestinians, first of all. I was working in the State Department, spending time in the Middle East, and I became, very much in relationship with and proximate to people on both sides of that sort of decades-long conflict. But even more, I started this work because of my own sense of implication in their conflict as an American. So when I got close to it, I realized that my role as an American was actually having an impact on them in ways that I was not aware of. So along with a guy named Greg Khalil, back in 2009, we started Telos to help Americans better understand how they were impacting the world and how American power was working itself out in places like the Middle East, and how supporting conflict resolution and peacemaking was also a way to live out our American values and support American interests in the world. Since then, we broadened that work and to go beyond just the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and our role there, and to the work in the South and programs in some other places like you talked about, because this work is really under a larger umbrella of peacemaking, which really does begin with what you're talking about tonight, with becoming proximate to others.
Todd, I'm really curious to understand about what, as you were abroad, was there anything specific that resonated with you that made you think we have similar issues that we need to respond to at home? How did the stories of people abroad bring you back home to some of the things that we are seeing here?
Sometimes it's sort of stepping out of your own story that allows you to see it more clearly. So going to look at someone else's problem, so to speak, was a way to have a little bit of distance and kind of be a learner about conflict in general. And you find that there are, unique and specific things to every conflict, but a lot of these, particularly either geopolitical or societal or ethnic or racial conflicts, all have some things in common. And so it's sometimes easier to see it, when you're out of your own context and someone else's, and then you come back. And in fact, this is the word that so many people tell us after they've been on our trips. We've led over 100 trips to Israel and Palestine over the last 10 years. And one of the things people come back and say is, I don't just kind of have a new way of understanding that. I have a whole new set of glasses to see the world, which is what led us to create some programs outside of Israel-Palestine, including the one in the American South, which is an attempt to help us see our own American story through a broader lens than we are normally kind of accustomed to learning it.
Tell us a little bit about Tellus's approach with the multi-narrative structure, and how that informs the people who are getting proximate, and how that is carried over into the American South.
Well, prior to COVID, our primary program was a trip program. We've done other things too, but we have always really tried to refine a very unique travel experience for people wherever we're going. But the Israel-Palestine program, for an example, we take people on a very unique journey where we go to this sort of ancient historic land, and we'll spend a little time doing the historic or biblical or traditional sites, whatever your interest is there. But we spend most of our time, 80% of the trip, is actually just entering into the lives of people. And we don't just sort of pick out certain people. We try to kind of cast a wide net and really try to spend time with Israelis, Palestinians, Jews, Christians, Muslims, all throughout the land. And you know, there's not just sort of one Jewish story or one Palestinian story. There are multiple stories, and you can't take them all in, but we're trying to give you a cross section of different kinds of views and experiences, and understand people's narratives and how their own history and story has shaped how they see the world and how they see each other and that sort of thing. And along the way, we also introduce people to the peacemakers, because they're small in number, but they're there on both sides. There are people who are trying to find a way out of the mess they're in, and they know that the bottom line is the only way out of it is to in some way allow something for the other side. Like, you know, there's no zero sum to this. And so if you're gonna build a better future, it has to work in some measure for people on both sides. We have come to call that word mutual flourishing. The idea that what I want for myself and my family and my tribe, I can't have really at the expense of my neighbor. I can only fully have those things when my neighbor has access to those things too. And so it's that kind of approach. And we learn from these peacemakers. We learn so many things. We learn about listening just to understand. I know you guys call this thing generous listening. Is that what the term you used? That's what we're talking about. Listen. Yeah, it's not listening to debate or argue. It's literally listening to another human being and understanding how they have such a different opinion maybe than I do, or from each other, but trying to understand as the first step. That's really important. It does so many good things for us. It builds empathy. It humanizes the other person. In making them feel heard, it gives them a whole new sense of agency. There's a lot of benefit to that sort of, but we do those sort of practices along the way. We try to demonstrate the links between peace and justice. There's a lot of things we try to sort of expose people to along the way. We talk about the role of reconciliation and forgiveness, the role of power and structure, and all of that as a part of the journey, leading them toward not trying to sort of force them to a conclusion, but giving them the fullness in a way that allows them to make up their own minds about all of that, and to arrive at a place of sort of generosity and in the complexity, to know that you've got to sort of, what works for one, again, has to sort of work for the other, no matter which side you feel more compelled by or drawn to.
The generosity aspect and the complexity, I think, is really important for me when I was traveling with you, specifically to Israel, Palestine. Oftentimes, I think people go into those experiences thinking that they're going to have a clearer understanding of an opinion. I'm sorry, but what actually happened for me is I realized, like you said, the depth of complexity and the nuance that every person brings to their story, and so it opened up the lens even broader, where I had a lot more curiosity to learn more, to listen more, to lean in more.
And that's such an important thing for us to learn as Americans in dealing with some of our own challenges here. So if you look at the history of race in America, this is a complex story, and it's one that we have to take the time to understand and go through. And there's a Supreme Court justice from earlier in the century who said, that simplicity on this side of complexity is worthless, but simplicity on the other side of complexity is worth great value. But the point of that is that there can be simplicity. We can reduce things down to something simple, but never until we've gone through the complexity of it all. And so often, even in our own American story, we haven't fully gone through the complexity of it to get to a place of simplicity. We do the sort of lazy thing of thinking we've got it figured out on the front end without having to do the work. And that's so true when you go to Israel and Palestine. It's a very complicated story. There are some simple truths that you can draw from it, but you have to be willing to go through the complexity to get there.
Can you give me an example of a time where you have perhaps practiced generous listening and your curiosity's been piqued, and perhaps you have had an experience of standing in another's shoes different than what you thought going in?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, there's so many examples of that, because even, I mean, I've led more than 50 of these trips through the years, and on each of them, I think I almost have a moment similar to that where, because I keep pushing into new relationships with people, you know, I mean, we have this sort of core set of friends and people that we work with, and we're always kind of trying to meet new people at the same time, and you're trying to you know, take on perspectives that maybe challenge my own even. That's important for me. And so I'm always learning those things. I think one of the most important experiences that sort of people generally have on our trips will come late in a trip, because again, you're having a variety of experiences. You're, you know, having a Shabbat meal with a Jewish family one night. You're visiting a Palestinian refugee camp another day. You're going to a Jewish settlement. You're meeting with you know, a Muslim sheikh. You're going to, you know, I mean, you're sort of back and forth, and you're starting to think you've kind of got this figured out, and you're kind of putting it in a box somewhere. And then we take them into a room and we meet with a Jewish Israeli grandmother who's kind of a hipster in the way she dresses, and a Palestinian Muslim dad who's kind of very conservative, and you think, well, what are these people going to teach me or show me? And why are they even in the same room together? And it turns out they're close friends, but the one thing they have in common is that they've each lost a child in the conflict. And so a Jewish mother whose son was killed by a Palestinian sniper while he was doing his military service in the West Bank, a Muslim Palestinian father whose 10-year-old daughter was killed by an Israeli border policeman, shot in the head outside her school by a rubber bullet. I mean, these people should hate each other, and yet they are sitting together, and they have chosen this path, not of revenge and hatred, but a path of reconciliation. And they have become proximate with each other. And one of these women I know spoke, two of these women spoke from this organization, this reconciliation program, spoke at the Barrington White House a couple of years ago, right? And there's just such powerful stories, because one of them is a woman named Robbie Damlin, the Jewish grandmother I was telling you about. And Robbie says, you know, when you get to know your enemy, that's the beginning of the end of conflict. So it doesn't end everything, but it's like when you put that human face on someone that is your enemy, it starts to really mess with you. And that's what it did to her. She met, as a part of this reconciliation program, she met some Palestinian mothers who'd also lost a child, and it just turned her upside down. It changed the course of her life. And so for our folks, just when they're on these trips and they're starting to kind of get pulled in this direction or this direction, and then you meet with these folks and you don't know quite what to do with that, but it really is a transformative moment when you meet people who should be filled with this sort of, you know, desire for revenge and so forth, and they're doing the work of reconciliation, really putting everything out there and building relationships across the aisle, across the divide, and being agents of that, teaching it in schools and speaking in public events and writing and doing all these programs and that sort of thing to help both sides understand the other side's stories. It's very powerful.
I know that when I was in Israel, Palestine, when we would, like you said, speak with different groups of people, oftentimes on opposite sides of the conflict, I know that I would get frustrated because I got to be the go-between, and I always wanted to think, like, if you could come together and listen to one another and be together, that the stories would start to take shape, and the humanizing would start to take shape, and like you said, the mothers who can come together out of the mutual loss of a child if they can do that, we can do it, right? We can do that work.
You can, but it really is about what you're talking about tonight. It is that intentionality about becoming proximate, and it's our challenge in America. We are living very separated lives right now, segregated and separated in many ways, and most of them are by choice, in terms of like choosing to live with people who are politically minded. Like, I mean, there's just so many ways that we're sorting ourselves right now, and we're not engaging with and we're not becoming proximate, and there's a real risk and danger in that. You can begin to dehumanize people when you don't have relationships with them and don't interact with them in any kind of, empathetic way. And so this stuff that you're talking about, I think, is so critical for us as Americans.
Tell me a little bit more about how Telos has decided to lift up the African American history with the trip to the South, and what that has done for you, just in your experience thus far.
Well, it really was born out of the fact, as I said earlier, a lot of people came back from Israel Palestine trips and said, okay, now I understand this. I understand a lot more than I did before, and I want to play a different kind of role supporting conflict resolution there. But we've got big problems here at home. How do I think about those differently? Help me figure this out. And so we began to take some of our key alumni and friends like you, and on these trips in the South, trying to figure out, how do we tell a broader American story? One that is more inclusive of the fullness of the American experience, and that really helps us understand the sort of way in which our American story is this very complicated story of very noble, ideals that are codified into our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution, our founding documents, and that sort of thing. And they are directly, contradicted by other parts of our story in the way that we treated first Native Americans and then Africans who were brought here, African Americans, and we codified those things into those same beautiful documents. And so that complex story, it doesn't make America, all this or all this. It just demonstrates that it's a very complicated story, and it can only be fully appreciated when you are willing to take it all in and see the tension that we built into the system from the beginning, the contradiction that we built in from the beginning, and how in many ways our story is really about the sorting of that out. We've been sorting that out ever since, and we're still sorting it out because the legacies of that are still with us. And you've referenced the work of Brian Stevenson at EJI, and this is exactly the stuff he does, and we've been very influenced by his work in that way too. So personally, as a white male Southerner from Arkansas, as you noted, this has been really hard stuff for me. Even in Israel and Palestine, I go there all the time. I feel implicated as an American by what goes on there. But at the end of the day, it's their conflict more than it's mine. I don't live there. I'm not, and when I go on sort of these American trips, I have nowhere to hide. It's really wrenching, but it's so important that we are willing to take on our own history, our own story, better understand it, and really wrestle with these deep-rooted issues of power and structure and equity that go back to the founding of the Republic, that are stood alongside values of universal human dignity and all that sort of stuff that were there, held in tension together.
So Todd, so we get into the visit to the American South. We as Americans are sitting there listening to our story and getting a broader understanding of the full picture. And then what? We come home, and what happens next? How does Telos encourage and activate the people who have traveled with you? What opportunities are there for them?
Well, we think you bear responsibility for the things you know about. So once you sort of know something, you have some sense of responsibility or implication. And so we want people to understand that these are not just educational experiences, that as you enter into the lives of particularly vulnerable people, it's wrong to not come away from that committed to sort of trying to do something, not to come in as sort of some savior to fix something, but to understand your own part in it. And so part of what we do on these trips is that, in peacemaking, you learn that self-interrogation is way more important and helpful than blaming someone else, right? So that's just a basic principle, that it's like, I can barely deal with myself and bring about any change. I have almost no ability to change somebody else, right? And again, that's kind of a basic principle. So being willing to self-interrogate rather than cast blame is really critical, both myself and my sort of tribe, whatever tribe I belong to. And so on these trips, we want to expose our own biases and our own implication in this way, in the own way that we may have benefited from certain systems and so forth, and then figure out, what do I do to actually deal with that? You know, what people, but it can look like a lot of different things. We've created some programs on the other side of trips that have been helpful in moving people toward taking action and collective action, because Telos, we very much believe in doing things in community with each other, that we're meant to kind of do things collectively and together and that sort of thing. So we, on the other side of trips, have created a program called the Telos Table, where we try to, and we sort of softly launched this last year. We've taken a pause during COVID, but we're going to relaunch it when possible. And the idea is to have groups of people who've traveled and had these travel experiences to meet together regularly, share a meal together in the same way we did on trips, but we go on a learning journey, and then at the end of each evening, every 3 or 4 months when you get together, you commit to doing something together. It could be some kind of political advocacy. It could be some other kind of, work that you do, some creative project, a lot of things you could do, but it looks like taking what you know and seeing what your own responsibility is, figuring that out, and then acting on it, because we think that's really, really critical. It's wrong not to in some ways.
Thanks, Todd, so much. We were just getting going, and of course, we're already out of time, but I'm so excited to, when COVID is over, be able to bring some of our courageous community on a trip with Telos. And also, I encourage everyone to go ahead and find Telos online and sign up for their email newsletters and get to tell us a little bit more about what they're offering virtually at this time. Thank you so much for being here, Todd, and thank you so much for the work you're doing with Telos.
Thank you all very much.
All right, so now we're going to talk with Zina and her guest, who is doing work in Chicago.
Thank you, Jess. Thanks, Todd. That was fabulous. I have the privilege of introducing to the Barrington community and beyond, Tonika Lewis-Johnson. She's a photographer, a visual artist, and a lifelong resident of Chicago's South Side neighborhood, Inglewood. In 2010, a decade ago, she helped co-found Resident Association of Greater Inglewood, that spells rage, whose mission is to mobilize people and resources to force positive change in Inglewood through solution-based approaches. Within her artistic practice, Tonika often explores urban segregation and documents the nuance and richness of the Black community. She was featured in Chicago Magazine as a 2017 Chicagoan of the Year for her photography of Inglewood's everyday beauty, countering the pervasive media coverage of poverty and crime. But tonight, we've invited her here to talk about a particular project, the Folded Map Project. If you took a map of Chicago and folded it from its 0 point, the communities that would touch include Inglewood and Edgewater. But if you know anything about Chicago, you know that Inglewood and Edgewater are different. Tonika's Folded Map Project visually investigates disparities among Chicago's residents while bringing them together to have a conversation. In 2019, she was named one of the Field Foundation's leaders for a New Chicago. And most recently, she was appointed as a member of the Cultural Advisory Council of the Department of Cultural Affairs and specific events by the Chicago City Council. And we don't have time to unpack what happened with the New York Times this weekend, but let me invite you to Google Tonika and New York Times and you will see for yourself. We are going to start tonight with a particular invitation for you. We want you to see what happens when you fold the map of Chicago. We're going to introduce you to 2 map twins. What's a map twin? These are men and women who have the identical addresses on opposite ends of the city. And we're going to show you what happens when people get proximate, when they see one another. Like Todd said, when you meet the person you have othered, that's when the conflict begins to end. So before Tonika's voice blesses us with wisdom from this project, won't you watch these two videos, one about 1.5 minutes and one about 2.5 minutes, and learn a little more about what happens when you fold a map.
I decided that I wanted to be a homeowner. So I looked in Inglewood, and Inglewood was what I could afford. So I moved to Inglewood.
And how much was your home?
At that time, it was, well, why am I saying at that time? It was $61,000.
And what about you, Wade and Jennifer? How did you come to live in your neighborhood?
We wanted to live in a house. We wanted to have a green space. We looked at another number of neighborhoods in Chicago and decided we really loved the feel of Edgewater. So that's why we purchased here. Anything else?
I think I remember when we came here, you know, there was a backyard and there was a neighbor next door, you know, hanging out in the backyard. I think they were having like lunch with wine or something like that. And that was nice. And I like that part of the neighborhood feel.
And how much was your home when you purchased it?
$535,000.
It's a concept that's been building for about 3 years. It started with Tonika Johnson's Folded Map project. My wife Jennifer and I were the first Northside map twins with our neighbor Nanette here on the 6100 block of South Bishop. And we've kept up the relationship for the last 3 years, and we've talked about, you know, what we can do to build on it in order to close the gaps between the neighborhoods in Chicago with regard to social justice, economic equity, and what have you.
We started talking about putting a group together and somewhat modeling after Tonika's folded map. We decided that we wanted to do like block twins. We just want change on our block. We want to matter on our block. We're gonna plant flower boxes at the corner entering into the 6100 block on Bishop. Some of the elderly neighbors want flowers in front of their house, so we're gonna dig up and put flowers in front of their houses. And we just coming together as a community from the north side and the community from the south side to bring one community together.
We're doing a beautification project just to get people from the north side and the south side together, working together to help beautify the block where the residents of this block want it to be beautified.
My hope is that we'll have broader conversations about how we can support one another, think about why our blocks are similar and different and what are the systemic issues that might drive that difference.
I'm so excited to see people from all walks of life and different neighborhoods come together to improve the block and make it a beautiful space.
To see it happening and to be a part of it happening in a place that I grew up in and a place that my aunt has lived for years is a beautiful thing.
Sadie planted 2 planters she made a new friend. What's her name again? Justice?
Yeah.
Justice, how old is she?
10.
And how old are you?
9.
Yeah.
This is community. Anytime we can get together, meet new people, meet neighbors, make new friends, have a good time in safety, you can't get past it.
And I just believe if people give it a chance, everybody can have it. You just have to give it a chance.
Tonika, as you unmute your microphone, let me say blessings, my sister. You have stayed hopeful. We can see it in the smiles on those faces. How did you start the Folded Map project, Tonika?
Well, it was a seedling of an idea ever since I was a 13-year-old starting high school while I was living in Inglewood, and my high school was 15 miles north in the predominantly white neighborhood. The school that I went to was called Lane Tech, and every day I made that commute on the bus and the train for 2 hours, and I started to notice the difference between my neighborhood and the neighborhood my high school was in, as well as recognizing the streets were named the same. It was my first time understanding that, oh, the streets that exist in Inglewood go 15, 18 miles north. And it was really in high school that I started to understand the beauty and benefit and necessity of diversity. My high school has the largest student body of all Chicago public schools. It's 4,000. The entering freshman class is 1,300. And it is a school that accepts students from all over Chicago. So at age 13, I was literally dropped into the true reflection of Chicago. Lane Tech had the equal percentage of each race represented in Chicago. It was a demographic that a student body that they curated specifically to reflect Chicago's racial demographic. So there was equal percentage of Black, Latino, white, and Asian. Unfortunately, now they are not able to use race as a way to curate their demographic due to a federal law that passed. But at the time in the 90s, that was my experience. And I built very strong friendships and relationships with a diverse group of friends. And that is how I got to know many Chicago neighborhoods through my friendships. And we all realized that that was the way to truly know a location, a neighborhood, despite what we all heard on the news about each other's neighborhoods. It didn't matter because we was with each other every day for 4 years, and we just got to know each other in our neighborhood. So I experienced firsthand the beauty of integration and how that can be a doorway into understanding someone else's lived experience and how that expands your own understanding of yourself. So that is what led me to constantly think about the concept of Folded Map before I actually started working on it 20 years later as an adult.
So you had the opportunity to literally be proximate with all of Chicago in those incredibly formative years during high school. So now that you have folded the map and brought people proximate to one another through your project, tell us what you believe the map twins are learning. Tell us how you've seen them transform in their engagement with one another.
What's amazing to me is the commonality and the similarities in expanded worldview. It's exactly the same as what Todd said. It doesn't matter the different geographic locations. When you have people who are interested in caring and learning meet each other, they already have that passion of wanting to learn and have a new experience. So that right there is a commonality built in, regardless of their lived experience. So they enter into whatever the situation is, be it through Todd's program, through Folded Map, they enter into this experience wanting to learn, being interested in expanding their own worldview. And that's a commonality that they enter into these experiences with. So they're already, steps ahead of a lot of people who have to get, encouraged to that point. And their interactions reflect that. They already know how to do generous listening because they wanted to. They already understand that they need to get proximate. And what they learn in the process is a variety of things. But as we saw with the MAP twins that everyone witnessed, what they learned is that they wanted to do something more beyond their friendship, which was block twins, having their neighbors meet each other. And that was not a part of Folded Map beyond them meeting. So that's definitely what I've realized, is that the similarities and commonalities of all of these different individuals is just reflected in their interest to care.
As we witnessed the planting in the gardens in that second video, it was far more than just the three MAP twins.
Yeah.
It seemed that they had recruited people. So
Yeah.
do you think the people, your MAP twins, have become ambassadors for this kind of curiosity and learning and caring? Are they convincing others to come along?
Oh, yes. The event that they hosted and created was so touching. I mean, it was literally the neighbors from the north side being introduced to the neighbors of the MAP twin in Inglewood. And that alone is major, because a lot of people have their preconceived ideas about greater Inglewood, and they are just quite frankly scared to even come to this neighborhood. So the fact that all of them were willing to push through that misperception of a neighborhood so that they can meet other people is just amazing. And they are definitely ambassadors. They're going to be continuing this project, their initiative, far beyond, you know, me continuing Folded Map. You know, I'm moving on to other projects, and they're still, you know, being the ambassadors of that change.
Tonika, what have you discovered in this work? What have you distilled that you want to be sure the world knows and does not forget? Share with us your deepest learning.
I would say the deepest learning is the difficult psychological process of listening and communicating. That when you are having conversations, listening to someone else's lived experience, and you're a person who have maybe benefited from the inequity that you all are discussing, there's an emotional process. People get uncomfortable when they start to feel guilt, and people get uncomfortable when they start to feel like they have consistently been the victim. And it's awkward. People are going to make mistakes saying things because they haven't had practice talking about these issues, especially to people who are the beneficiaries of inequity and, you know, the victim of it. And so when you bring those people together, it's going to be difficult. You know, you're going to have to choose your words. You're going to have to think more. You're going to have to really listen to the other person. And for me, Folded Map and the MAP twins having their conversations was hopefully a model for people of not how to do it, but how weird and awkward and difficult it is. I mean, you're literally answering the question of how much did your house cost when you live on the same street 15 miles apart, and it is a striking difference. So just even that answer alone is uncomfortable. You know, some of the MAP twins, they answered that question with me one way, and when they got in front of their MAP twin, they changed the number by a few thousand, you know, because that was how they grappled with whatever it is they were feeling. And it wasn't upon me to call it out, like, well, you said something different. No, I knew why they were doing it, because they were processing their emotions. And when you're listening, we have to understand that people are being triggered. They're processing their emotions, and sometimes it comes out and is expressed in weird ways. And we just have to learn how to deal with, how to listen and communicate. So that's one thing that I've learned is to appreciate the vulnerability people are coming into difficult conversations with, and being delicate
I hear the concurrence with Todd's words about go through the complexity in order to get to the simplicity.
Yes.
Don't start with the simplicity.
Yeah.
How did you encourage some of your MAP twins to stay at it when in that awkwardness they might have wanted to back away? What did you do to encourage the willingness to stay in the complexity?
I didn't say anything. I learned how to be quiet. I learned how to sit in the silence and not try to fix it as the facilitator. I let them sit there with whatever had landed, and we all just sat there looking at each other sometimes until someone cracked a joke, until someone said, well, this is weird, until someone said, I feel guilty and I don't know why, until someone said, I see why you don't come from the North Side because you all have everything here. I wouldn't either, you know, until someone found a way to disrupt the uncomfortability. So that is how I learned how to encourage them, by letting them actually move on their own emotions to figure it out. And it was challenging for me because I wanted to fix it and I couldn't. I had to let them do it.
You let silence give birth. That is powerful.
Oh,
My
so
sister, how has this changed you?
It has changed me immensely because, you know, I'm also learning. I may be the artist and the facilitator of this kind of engagement, but I created the project because of my own frustration. I had become older. I had become a homeowner living in Inglewood who was angry at how my neighborhood was treated, and that people didn't understand the systemic reasons why, the housing discrimination, the lack of city services over decades. And I did the project to basically show, like, beyond a shadow of a doubt, you can't tell me that it's not any different. And it was really, you know, with rage, right, that I created this project. But in doing the project, you know, I was assuming people on the North Side just didn't care. And I quickly learned that that wasn't the case. I actually thought, you know, only my cool friends from high school, that diverse group, only they cared. And what I was revealed by doing the project was, no, so many people truly care, but don't know how to help. Don't know how to help beyond volunteering, don't know how to build connections across the geographic and racial divide. And that changed me. I was able to say that, no, there are people who care. There are people from the South Side who want to go to the North Side and experience all of the resources that they're entitled to as Chicago residents. And it's people on the South Side who aren't mad at people on the North Side. Like, I didn't really think that existed. And it changed me as a result.
I didn't ask you this when we talked this morning, but because so many of our listeners have maybe never been in Inglewood, just give us 5 words that describe your home. Tell us about Inglewood in 5 words.
Strong community, beauty within the people, history, struggle, and resilience. I don't even know, is that 5?
that will preach, as they say in my line of work. Tonika, thank you. We need a whole hour with Todd. We need a whole hour with you. I am grateful for the project. Friends, I saw that Claire put on the chat, the website for Folded Map. Please go, please support this sister. Do check out what happened this weekend with the New York Times and give her some jazz hands.
Oh.
You are phenomenal. and a change agent in the most powerful way. Tonika, thank you for joining us. Thank you for enlightening us this evening.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Friends, we are going to take a 5-minute intercession. Please stay on the line. We have the principal of Sunny Hill Elementary School. Let me introduce you to the principal of Sunny Hill Elementary School. It really is my pleasure to introduce you to my friend, Cynthia Armendariz Maxwell. Cynthia has served a Sunny Hill School, approximately 320 kindergartners through 5th graders, and she and her staff have created a welcoming and a nurturing environment. It's located in the community of Carpentersville. Sunny Hill is the single district school in District 220 of a majority student population of color, and the single district school serving a majority low-income demographic. Cynthia was born in 1962. She wrote that. I'm not putting that out there. She received her bachelor's degree in elementary education from Loyola University of Chicago, her master's degree in educational administration and social policy from my alma mater, Northwestern University, and her doctorate from George Williams College in educational administration. Cynthia, I am honored to have you be among our invited and honored speakers this evening. We have listened to 2 beautiful speakers who have shared with us how they have created circumstances where people get to be proximate, where they get to walk alongside and stand in one another's shoes. Todd and Tonika have both offered us wisdom about how we might learn through those kinds of situations, through another's lived experience. And both have shown us how people who do that might be moved to act and live in new ways. I know, because you've shared with me, Cynthia, that you've had an experience of walking in another's shoes, of being proximate, and it changed you. I would love for you to tell us that story.
Thank you, Zina. Yes, as I reflected on standing in another's shoes, I remember back to when my father worked with Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta of the United Farm Workers. This is going back to the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. They were working to overcome a racist system in a struggle for migrant Mexican farm workers' dignity and a living wage. The farm workers worked in fields without access to drinking water or bathrooms. They were sprayed with pesticides, injured on the job without the recourse of health insurance. They were fired for being too slow, too old, or too outspoken, and did not have access to unemployment insurance. They were denied overtime, holidays, and vacations, and were regularly cheated out of their wages. Their children transferred in and out of schools throughout the years as they migrated back and forth across the salad bowl of the world, picking the crops that were in season. The families living in tents, cars, and rickety shacks. Throughout my entire childhood, we never had grapes or lettuce in our home in solidarity with the farm workers' boycotts. My parents' lifelong commitment to social justice defined our family. Now, long after the grape strikes ended, I was already in college, I tried eating grapes, but my stomach clenched so violently that I had to spit them out. It took me a few years of trying to actually be able to physically digest grapes because I had felt so bad for so long for the suffering of the farm workers that even just looking at grapes caused me to envision hungry children and their parents toiling all day in backbreaking work in the scorching, dusty fields, while also being subjected to racism at work, home, and at school. Thinking of that desperate situation physically made me sick to my stomach. And while I personally never worked in the desert or never toiled as a farm worker, I developed an ability I learned to empathize, in a manner of speaking, to walk in their shoes. And this impacted who I am. And now, 50 years later, I still struggle with invisible barriers that divide people who work at manual labor and those who don't. And I see how invisible barriers can separate us in our community of Barrington. And so I remain committed to removing barriers, to help to overcome barriers, to take down barriers, so that we can learn about each other, and then we can work together to provide equity for all in our community. And no, I don't have the answers. I don't have all the answers. But what I do know is that when we gather in settings like Courageous Conversations, when we all put our minds and our hearts together in purposeful, thought-provoking conversation, we will create new and powerful ways to build a more courageous community.
Cynthia, thank you. Thank you for reminding us that as we listen to those stories and take them in, we are changed. And when we're brave enough to have those conversations more broadly, we create change around us. I am so grateful you are in this community, so grateful you're a leader in this community, so grateful that you were willing to say yes to come and be a part of this tonight. You are amazing. Jessica, I believe I am to hand this off to you.
Thank you, Zina, and thank you, Cynthia. I echo Zina's words, and we're thrilled that you have been a leader in the Barrington community, and are also thrilled that you have been such an active participant in a year of Courageous Conversations last year, and now are an advisor for us this year. Thank you. Your words inspire us to now reflect on ourselves. So we're going to take this time to break out into discussion groups. To join a breakout room, just sit tight. JP will move us all into our rooms and then move us back to share out with the full group at the end. There will be a member of our wonderful facilitator core in each breakout room who will hold the questions and make sure to allow time for each person to speak. So please don't go anywhere. Sit tight. We'll see you in a little bit after our breakout rooms and dialogues. Are we all back? We hope you had some interesting dialogues and some good dialogues. And now we would love to hear some of your thoughts about getting proximate and building bridges. If you type in the chat, Zina and I will read aloud your responses to the question, where are the invisible fences, walls, or barriers in your community? And how will you overcome them? So please find the chat, and we will follow and read them out loud. So sharing what you discussed in your breakout sessions, and answering the question, where are the invisible and sometimes visible barriers in your community, and how will you overcome them?
Diane tells us that one of those barriers is access to education and opportunities.
Jean says, entry-level jobs and affordable housing is hard to find in Barrington's particular zip code.
We recognize that English as a second language can be, it often is a barrier.
Abigail shares that in Barrington, there is often a prohibitive economic cost of living centrally.
And we had this conversation in my breakout group about people are separating labor and geographic location between being part of a community. That division can't easily be overcome, it seems.
Heather says access to transportation, and that's something that we talked about in our breakout session, particularly to Barrington. I think that's an important one.
And Stacy said differences in socioeconomic levels in and around Barrington.
Carolyn says at work in public middle school, she's in Cambridge, Massachusetts, access to education based on SES and family situations. I'm sorry, I do not know what SES stands for offhand.
Socioeconomic status.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I wasn't quick enough on that.
I was trying to be quick.
Barriers include food access, access to education, access to security, physically and socially. And this group agreed that trust and fear, fact-checking, pushing against ignorance, learning and making the personal connection help with these levers.
Yes, thank you. Laura says in the schools via advanced courses, gifted programs, tutors, etc. So some people have access to that and some don't.
And I think Kenneth is responding to this desire to divide, that we can overcome dividing the difference between those who are employed, those who are the workers and the people. We can overcome these differences.
Stephanie brings up the transportation point again as well. How are our cities and towns designed? You know, thinking about access to walkways, access to public transportation, access to roads that aren't dead ends. How do we divide ourselves through land ownership and things like that?
And Claire reminds us that there are different spaces for social recreation, some that are public, but then there are many who have access to private country clubs and other ways of staying healthy and staying fit and of decompressing.
Tamara says, we saw barriers in education and felt that elementary students and parents should get a chance to meet prior to middle school. That's, I think, specific to Barrington, probably.
Sue reminds us that housing costs and the implications for an entire community, as well as school performance, can serve as a form of a code to be a fence or a barrier. Being willing just to show up and engage with people is the first step in even beginning to solve these issues.
Carolyn says, time can be a barrier for working parents. Not being able to drop off or pick up for after school activities for children. And I would also add when schools choose to have parent conferences or meeting times during the working day can also be a barrier.
And Kenneth reminds us, not only are there those social spaces that are not available to everyone, there are even private lands. We saw that on the North Shore a few weeks ago when a woman attacked verbally two young African-American men, telling them they did not belong on a particular beach. That was public land, but she assumed was private land.
Sam talked about in her group belonging to several communities, a residential community, a work community, professional associations, and what are the points of entry into those different places?
Abigail reminds us that her group discussed how a large school system can be a barrier to feeling a sense of community or being recognized or welcomed.
Pierre says, growing up in Barrington can, in and of itself, be a barrier. Small town wide experience affects our ability to see and understand other points of view experiences. So Pierre's kind of talking about those bubbles that we can find ourselves in. Thank you, Pierre.
Tamara, their group discussed the need to have conversation with those who are different from us and have different opinions from us. So again, that we burst through that bubble.
And Casey says, no need to internalize the guilt for where you were born. So I would add to that, but the need for curiosity and introspection is a great follow-up to that. Okay. Anybody else want to add to the chat before we close up for the evening? Zina, it is yours to close.
Very briefly. Yesterday it was very cold when I came home and I lit the fire in my house and drew around me a waffle weave blanket, light in its weight, but warm. And as I sat there last night holding this blanket, I could see the threads. I could see through them, but I could also feel their warmth. And I feel like tonight we've begun by weaving our own kind of blanket. Listen to the things that you've heard tonight, and this is only a small part. Stay hopeful, because hopelessness is the enemy of justice. Stepping out of your own story into another's can help you see your own story better. That mutual flourishing means that what you need to grow and be safe is what I need, and we both want to achieve that. That complexity is the gateway to simplicity, not the other way around. And it's wrong to stand in the face of someone's suffering and someone's story poured out for you and not be changed. We learn that the deepest learning comes in the emotional process of the struggle. It comes as we hold the silence and let the silence give birth to wisdom. We learned that we're going to make mistakes, but we have to start somewhere. And we learn that when we know better, we do better. We learn that there are levers we can shift, but only once we notice where the invisible fences and walls are. And we learned that we each have power in this process, at first to be curious, then to notice, then to be in dialogue, and then to seek change. Imagine the warmth and weft of a blanket now on your shoulders that is meant to hold you and warm you and encourage you. This is the beginning of our brand new season. But my brothers and my sisters, my friends, my siblings, we have been given pieces that together we can weave into something strong, because that blanket might then be an instrument we use to catch somebody that's falling. That blanket might be something we put overhead to stop the sun from beating down on the head of another. That blanket might be something that ties us together and we can hold on to and guide one another forward. It may start as a blanket around our shoulder, woven of the wisdom we've gained this evening, but it can be so much more, but only if we will choose to weave it and only if we'll choose to use it. Your presence tonight inspires that hopefulness that generates energy and strength. And this is only the beginning. We hope that you will take whatever sticks in your heart tonight, write it down on a Post-it and put it up somewhere where you're reminded about the learning you gained, because that's going to be your next step, maybe even the first step. But nothing starts without a first step. Thank you. Thank you for being courageous enough to come. Thank you to Cynthia and Todd and Tonika and all of you for being teachers around this table, for being generous listeners around this table, for just being at the table. The work has begun again anew, and you and I are the ones to carry it forward. May you find energy and strength and hopefulness in this night, and may you go forward in your own power with your own hopefulness leading the way. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.